Developed by Dreambox Studios, the same team that brought you the Guacamelee series and the PlayStation Vita classic, Severed, comes Nobody Saves the World. This action RPG hack-and-slash adventure has you play as a blank protagonist with the ability to transform into various different forms. Utilize your newly found powers to stop a great calamity that threatens your home. Nobody Saves the World stars you, Nobody. Yeah, you're playing as a nobody who lives in this magical world being slowly taken over by this fungal calamity. Picture The Last of Us, only a lot more silly. The only person that can stop them is this wizard who is nowhere to be found, so now it's up to you. A random nobody that comes across the wizard's wand and saves the day, or at least tries to. With your newfound wand, you're able to transform into various different forms for any needed occasion. You'll need these forms as you journey on your quest to collect the 5 crystal fragments that'll grant you the power to stop this fungal apocalypse. Like their previous work with Guacamelee, the entire thing is written under this humorous vignette with out-of-this-world personalities and funny characters that make the entire story a lot more lighthearted. It's a story with a serious premise, but that literally nobody, well, I guess in more ways than one, take it seriously. Across the 14-hour story, I found myself laughing and giggling at the charming cartoon presentation, with the equally delightful jokes in between. Nobody Saves the World is heavily inspired by the classic top-down RPGs and dungeon crawlers of the past, like The Legend of Zelda. It's a game that pushes you to grind, gain XP, and raise your stats. Nobody is a blank character, but with the power of the wand, they're able to transform into various forms or skins that come with their own sets of passive abilities and powers. Each form starts off relatively weak with a single move available. However, by completing the quest and objectives on the side of the screen, you'll earn XP that can level up each skin and in return unlock new moves and powers for said skin. It's a satisfying gameplay loop that kept me jumping in and out of quests for the next XP dump that would lead to some new attacks. These missions are usually simple, like defeating a certain amount of enemies with a certain skin. They're easy to pick up and play, which certainly lends to the game not being on Nintendo Switch, but also can feel a bit shallow over time. The dopamine rush came from gaining a ton of XP and seeing skins get more powerful over time. Unfortunately, that excitement did start to wear off a bit with the later sections of the game when I started to realize how simple and dull some of these missions were. While the 5 main dungeons holding a piece of crystal were fun, it was the areas in between, the side quests and the smaller dungeons that started to feel a bit more familiar. Completing these side objectives is what earns you stars, the same currency needed to unlock those main story dungeons. Not all of those side missions are bad, some are simple, but their comedic writing and premise often make up for it. It's just that when the game starts to feel repetitive, it can feel like a bit of a drag. As long as I had new forms to unlock and upgrade, I was usually still excited to continue on with the game, although towards the later half, I started to feel that fatigue. While its story certainly kept me smiling, Nobody Saves the World does suffer a bit from feeling shallow over time. It's most apparent when you reach the end of the campaign that feels like it ends so abruptly, rushing you to meet the final boss. Don't get me wrong, for a lot of the first 2/3 of the campaign, I was having a blast and was excited to unlock new powers and skins. Enemies with wards, they're these elemental damage shields, proved to be fun foes to tackle, and it tasked me to juggle different powers. Little changes in gameplay like that kept things feeling fresh. It wasn't until the game started to show everything it had to offer then that things started to feel a bit shallow. Had things been better and neatly tied at the end, I think the experience would have been better. The same goes for the co-op experience, which is online, although it's also handled as if it were a local co-op session. That means no split screen, but you share one given screen, so you run into the issue like you would in something like New Super Mario Bros., where you kinda have to dictate where one person is going because you control the camera on a single screen. Nobody Saves the World features a charming art style that is flat, vibrant, with strong stroked lines around the various characters. It's reminiscent of a children's cartoon mixed with a bit of Newgrounds Flash animation. It's not new, it's familiar, but in a cozy way. I enjoyed it. Especially when playing on the Nintendo Switch OLED model, the colors really popped. I did have a slight gripe though. There's this radial blur over the entire screen to help keep the attention towards the center of the screen. It's a nice effect, but it also goes over the UI elements, so things like my objectives, the menus, and so on, all appear slightly blurrier than the center of the screen. You can still read them fine, but once I noticed, it was hard to stop. I reviewed Nobody Saves the World on Nintendo Switch, but as far as performance goes, you can expect similar resolutions and frame rates across its available platforms. In handheld mode, I got a solid 60 frames per second at a 720p resolution. The animated flames and the little details in the overworld stood out particularly well because of that higher frame rate. In dock mode, the frame rate is still 60 frames per second, but the resolution gets bumped up to 1080p, similar to the more standardized consoles. Outside of that nitpick with the vignette, I think the game is marvelously presented and shines well on the Switch, specifically the OLED model, with its more vibrant screen and the pixel density when in handheld mode. When it comes to music, Nobody Saves the World features a cross between a creepy yet cute soundtrack. Imagine the themes of Nightmare Before Christmas or Coraline. It's charming with hints of rock meshed together with synth and bells. I think if you were a fan of the music in something like Don't Starve, you'll enjoy this. There are some nice touches with the sound design too, like the subtle sounds of steps or flames as I walk by a torch. I do wish there was a bit more variety though, like a change in the step when walking over different types of terrain. The rumble on the Switch is also used, but very sparingly. It only seems to rumble when you're about to die as opposed to your average hit from an enemy. It's nice that it's there, but it could have been better used. Nobody Saves the World is clearly inspired by the classic NES and SNES dungeon crawlers of the 80s and 90s. It more than delivers on capturing the fun of exploring and completing quests while adding its own sense of style with its humorous writing and colorful presentation. The game does start to stumble a bit towards the end of it, when it abruptly ends feeling like it front-loaded the campaign. However, that didn't spoil the fun entirely, and I still enjoyed my time for the majority of those 14 hours.